Hello and welcome to Psychology in the Wild, the podcast where we try to make sense of the everyday chaos of life. I'm Dr. Jamily Roberts.
And I'm Erin Shrimpton.
Erin, how are you?
I'm pretty much the same, navigating the wild chaos of everyday life. How about you?
Exactly the same. That's what I tend to be doing most days. That's actually how I could describe my life mostly. What has been wild in your week?
I had an interesting conversation with my youngest, who's 6 now, but this is kind of a recurring conversation that I have with both of my kids. And he said to me, Mom, completely out of the blue, Mom, why was smoking ever even a thing? And I was really taken aback because, first of all, it was obviously playing in his mind in some way, shape, or form. But it was kind of so that both the context being that both of my kids find the idea that smoking was ever a thing, or that cigarettes that they existed, or that they still do exist, but that it's just wild to them that people would used to smoke in the way that people did. Obviously, people still do smoke, but it used to be part of everyday life in a way that it isn't now. Like when we were growing up, Gemma, people were smoking on airplanes, people were smoking in restaurants, people were smoking in pubs, nightclubs, in each other's houses completely freely. Like it was just absolutely part of everyday life. So I think we must have at some point had that conversation with them to explain what it used to be like. And I think that now they look at it and go, what? I can't get my head around that. And they can't get their head around the fact that something that we now know to be so damaging to our health was just so commonplace and normal. So it kind of made me think about what will their kids be asking them? What will their kids be saying to them? How was I'm afraid to say it, but something like, how was social media everything, or how was the addiction to phones everything? I think that's the thing that I personally worry about most, that's damaging to our kind of mental health. But it also reminded me of a statistic that I'd read recently about loneliness. The headline or the kind of scary stat that comes out of it is loneliness and social isolation increase the risk for premature death by 26 and 29% respectively. And that's, by the way, because I had a little look down to see, okay, where is that study coming from? Because that seems completely wild. And it is actually on the basis of from a psychology journal and on the basis of a meta-analysis. So we talk about meta-analyses, don't we? Just to explain what that is. That's basically a study of lots of studies. So a kind of an aggregation of lots of studies. So when you look at, when you hear a stat like that, it's always useful to kind of go, oh yeah, but what, was that just one study based on 10 people? Or is that based on a number of peer-reviewed studies? And this one is. So that was my, let's say, wild train of thought this week, and kind of brings us on to our topic that we're going to talk about. But what do you think? Is this something that worries you?
Absolutely. And those are stats that I find absolutely shocking. And what I find really hard about that, and I think a lot of this was brought to the fore as we went through COVID as well. Think about, how much we lost connection with others. And it was actually scary in some respects to connect with others. And I think that will have lasting damage for lots of us, particularly when you think about loneliness. And I find the thing I find most scary about that stat is, in lots of ways, it's actually avoidable, but we have become a society that, I'm generalizing here. I know this is not the case for everyone, but there is an individualistic focus. Did I even say that right? Thinking,
I think you're right.
But also, a lot of us are sitting behind screens. We're not socializing as much. We're not traveling as much in lots of respects. And I do feel like we've lost some of that connection going into things like lockdowns, for example. And I hate to keep talking about COVID because we're so far past it now in terms of time. But actually, I remember when we were in the middle of COVID and this connection part happening. So you couldn't see your family and you couldn't see your friends. And I remember thinking, obviously people that don't have many people around or find it hard to connect or contact others are going to really suffer here. And also children, think about teenage years. That's what kept going through my head. My teenage years, all I cared about was my friends and
Yeah.
connecting with others and socializing. And that's really important for our development. It's really important for our
Yeah.
psychological development and development in general. There are
Mm.
reasons why we in general become more focused on friends during our teenage years, for example. This is just one
Yeah.
example. And we completely took that away. And I feel like everything, not everything, but a lot of things are behind screens, or we use social media to interact, or we use
Yeah.
messages. I barely answer my phone. If a phone number phones me that I don't recognize, I do not answer my phone. And I
I
just
know.
think, oh, and if it's someone that does need to get hold of me, then they'll send me an email, or they'll send me
I know.
a text message or a WhatsApp. Or I don't really read WhatsApp messages either. Um,
Mm.
so I think what's scary about that is just how important connection is. And actually, connection came up in
Mhm.
my very heavily in my research about resilience as
Yeah.
well, and the importance of connection and support. But also the fact that we could potentially connect more with others,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
but maybe we're losing the skills a bit, or maybe we're losing the habits.
I think both of those things are true, because it's funny thinking about this topic. I kind of thought to myself, I mean, this is all so obvious in a way.
Mm.
Why do we have to be teaching people? Because there are, like, in one of my courses on LinkedIn Learning is about building connection in teams, and it's like, God, I nearly sometimes feel when I bring this topic up when I'm doing those courses, or if I'm talking to an organization, I feel a bit conscious, because I don't want to feel like I have to tell people that they need to connect with one another, because I think most people know, right? But I think, and also, not only do most people know, but most people do go to it naturally, because, when you think about it, what are you up to for the weekend? There'll always be some form of social connection. You'll be doing something, that's generally, it's kind of tantamount to fun. It's usually having a connection with somebody else, or doing something with somebody else. Although not necessarily always. I know that parties aren't always fun, but especially of the children's variety. Um,
100%.
but mostly, I think most of us, even those of us who describe ourselves as introverts,
Mm.
most of us find in some way, shape, or form connecting with other people is something that we do most of the time, a lot of the time, and we are not really drawn to doing. But I think you're right. I think this exactly as you said. I think we're out of the habit of connecting more regularly with other people, and we're losing the skill a little bit. Basically, when I thought about this, my first thought actually went to older people,
Mm.
because you would think, older people who are living in isolation might be more inclined to be lonely and suffer from loneliness. But actually, the bigger category of generation in the cited in this report is young adults. So young adults now are reporting more social isolation, and also, and I can't remember the exact year. It's in the report. By the way, it's a really interesting report. The whole thing, it's 80 something pages long. So
Maybe we could put that in
you d-
the show notes.
we put it in the show notes. So yeah, but I don't necessarily expect anyone to read the whole thing. But just even it's nicely designed to where there are some key messages that come out of it. But the self-report of the feeling of social isolation. For some reason, I cannot say that phrase. Um, over the years since the 70s, in that age range in young adulthood, has gone up. So we're really seeing kind of peak levels of social isolation for that age range and for young adults. And I think there's partly, if you think about, and again, not to hark back, but I think COVID really was such a watershed moment in this whole cultural shift of working remotely, of also
Mm.
kind of getting out of the habit of socializing a little bit, because for
Uh-huh.
months we were told not to. So if you're in any way inclined to not socialize with someone, or to not go to a community-based event, and you then get out of the habit, maybe you're even less inclined afterwards. So, um, but I think there is a real habit issue, because you know it went on for uh, what in some cases were formative years for people. Like
Mm.
in our house, and in yours, it was formative years for our children, in terms of, like, my oldest was in his first year in school, and he there's a couple of things that probably he didn't learn to do in terms of, firstly, also sitting still and in class. That was not a skill he learned here, although I don't think many young boys do. Um, but I think there's those kind of formative skills of going into an office, making connection with people, holding the discomfort of vulnerability, that
Mm-hmm.
horrendous vulnerability, especially. I mean, I remember it so well, going into an office for the first time, trying to read all of the different cues and the different cultures of the different teams, and trying to
Oh,
kind of integrate yourself into it. These are all things that actually we don't have to do as much anymore, because we're doing it, as you said, via a screen. And in lots of ways, it's easier. So I can kind of see why you might opt to do it. But I think overall now, what I'm really seeing and what I would be advising, because I talk about this quite a lot with clients, what I'd be advising clients is, although, you know, I think you do need to give people autonomy to decide how and when they work, I would definitely be giving people a nudge to get into the office as much as you possibly can. And that is not for the productivity gain, just to be very clear, because that's also the thing
mm-hmm.
that's cited about remote versus in office working. I don't think there's any argument that shows that productivity is better when you're in an office, but I think there is a very strong argument that shows that connection and human connection, well-being, is optimized when people get into an office together for loads
I
of reasons.
agree.
And you know, work ultimately is one of the benefits of working is the social connection aspect of it. And if we're losing that, I mean, work
Mm-hmm.
really does just become um, an awful bore, if
I
I'm
agree.
honest.
I totally agree. And I think there's definitely something about quality over quantity. So I'm not really
Hmm.
for getting people back in the office 5 days a week. But then I've never,
No,
it's been a long time, even pre-COVID, since I've worked, in a set
same. Yeah.
office for 5 days, because I would go in and work with different clients, or, I'd be doing a project somewhere that I'd have to be there, a couple of days or a few days a week, and I'd be doing a project somewhere else. So I cannot imagine now commuting and getting on a train and being somewhere 5 days a week. And I think there's a risk of forcing people to do that, that it's going to make people resentful and disengaged. And I think we
100%.
know that. We're
Yeah.
seeing that.
Yeah.
However, I very strongly believe that there is also an argument for getting teams together. What I don't really like, and I've seen a
Hmm.
lot of this in my career, is lots of people in an office together, but everyone's on a Teams call anyway, or a Zoom call,
Oh,
whatever's
yeah.
being. So everyone's got their
Yeah.
headsets on, and no one's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
there's no point. You could be doing that anywhere. That I don't think
Mm.
it's for that. But I do think that having these opportunities to connect, it's the craziest things, or the simplest things that bring you together, is, it's a quick coffee. It's walking to go and get a
Hmm.
coffee with someone. It's popping out to get lunch and someone's going at the same time. You get to have a chat with them on the way, or you get
Yeah.
to ask, general questions. And, a lot of my friendships were made in a work context because we were there.
Mm.
Like, we were, one of my
Hmm.
best friends is one of my work colleagues from, I think we're getting on to almost 20 years ago, which is nuts.
Mm.
But if I think if it was left down to me to decide how often I was face to face with someone, and I know it's not always possible, and we should take advantage of virtual. We've got
Oh,
friends
yeah.
or relatives and colleagues on the other side of the world, and of course, we're not going to be face to face that often. You're in Ireland and I'm in England. Like, we can't always be
Mm.
face to face. But I do think there is something about making the opportunity. But even also, so yesterday I went for a meeting in London with another psychologist, and we catch up kind of fairly regularly. Generally, it's every
Mm.
couple of, I mean, summer's been a bit wild, but generally catch up every couple of months. And I do, and I love our conversations. So we'll be talking about, like, the projects we're working on, stuff we can do together, or stuff, and it's really great for me because it gives me ideas, and I'm
Mm.
assuming it's same for her as well. We're talking about our work lives, and also it's nice to connect with someone who's in a similar boat. Runs their own business and a psychologist, and there's not many people like that out there that I know. So, but what I will say is getting myself ready, getting on the train, figuring out, like, what work I'm going to do on the train, and what I need to take with me, and who's picking the kids up from school, and all of that jazz feels quite. And I know it's because I don't do it that often, but it does feel like a huge effort. And it's not that I don't want to do it, and it's not that I have to force myself either. But there is a part of me that has to remind myself that I book these things in because it's enjoyable, because it's good for
Yeah.
me.
And it's good.
Um,
Yeah.
Because if I was left to my own devices, I don't know how often I would book that kind of stuff in, if that makes sense. Because it also feels like a bit
I
like
know.
a non even though we're talking about work, it feels sometimes like a bit of a cheap work day as well. So I kind of have to let myself off the hook,
Yeah.
with that as well. But I think the more we talk about this topic and we realise that actually connecting with others, whether it be family, whether it be friends, whether it be colleagues, and making the effort, because let's be honest, there's often an effort. I have to get dressed properly when I go
Mm.
out. I have to
Yeah.
put makeup on. I have to, be presentable. Um, I have to get somewhere. There is often an effort involved, but I think we have to remind ourselves that it's really important for us and it's really good for us.
I know, and I absolutely would need the nudge as well myself to do it. And I think that's also, a function of the fact that we're in a different stage of life now,
Yeah.
where there's so much going on in the morning, even just to get out the door to bring the kids to school, let alone get ready for going in and meeting people. Often, obviously, I would choose then to just come home and work from home rather than get on a train and go into an office. But absolutely, you always and I think that's the other point is that even on the days where you don't feel like it, you really don't feel like being around other people, before it wasn't a choice, before you just got up, went into work, there was almost something easy about the fact that it just was a routine that you didn't even question. And
Hmm.
so now if you have a choice, it's kind of like, oh no, it's much more comfortable back at home. But actually, you're right. I think being intentional and also just booking those times in the future so that you hold yourself accountable to actually going and doing it. And again, it's not about productivity necessarily. It is about the benefit, the overall benefit of social connection, the overall benefit of
Hmm.
collaboration, which I suppose ultimately
Hmm.
is about productivity. But in the i- i- on the face of it, I think we have to be thinking about actually the benefit to my own well-being here is in the connection with other people. And also, I know I probably banged on about this before, but I find it fascinating how, because one of the things that I coach people around is, dealing with uncertainty, dealing with change. And I find it fascinating how neuroscientists have found that even just in the art of having a conversation or in the act of having a conversation, that prepares your brain to be more agile. Because, like we're having now, like we kind of knew what we were going to talk about today, didn't we? But we don't know how a conversation's going to go. And like that, if you meet somebody in the lift, in a workplace or at the coffee dock, you literally have no idea how that conversation is going to go. And it's really good practice for your brain. At the end of the day, when you've had a number of conversations, actually you've you've proven to yourself that you can be very agile because you've had all those conversations. And I know that
Mm.
seems sort of basic, but it's true. And I even find that some days, I remember even this week actually, I'd been on my own all day because I was working on something. I was in sort of that deep focus on working and trying to get something done. And about 4 o'clock, I just thought, oh, I need to go out and get something in the shop. And I went out and I bumped into somebody down in the shops. And I'd say they thought, what planet is she on? Because I just wasn't, I was out of the practice basically of having conversation with anybody. I was in my own world. And I think it just kind of obviated again to me, God, it's so important to keep those little conversations going. And we know as well from the research that those little micro moments, as they call them, of connectivity regulate the nervous system as well.
Mhm.
So not only is it good practice for your brain in terms of keeping yourself agile, but it literally regulates your nervous system. So in those moments, when which we talk about quite a lot, where you feel yourself getting tense and you're in sort of veering towards more kind of fight or flight feeling, the the benefit of having just a quick chat with somebody really helps to regulate that. So there's so many reasons to make sure that you're being intentional about connecting. And I think that's, although going back to what we said at the beginning, it feels like an obvious thing to advise. In a way, it is, but we have to be a bit intentional and obvious about this because this has shifted so much over the
Mm.
last few years. Previously, we were, like I said, we were going in and out of an office space much more, and we didn't have to think about it. Whereas now, most of us are working in some way, shape, or form from home some of the time.
Mhm.
And, you know, we 100% with you on the fact that there's huge benefit to that in terms of managing our own work-life blend, managing our well-being, managing our demands at home, and also for our own choosing how we like to work best. You know,
Mhm.
it's great. I'm delighted that I have a working life that I can choose, that I can work until 4 o'clock in a day without having to have a conversation with anyone, because it meant that I could get my work done. But it does also mean that we have to be so careful about making sure that we're chatting to people. Um,
And I think,
yeah. So, and that's part of the reason we're doing this podcast, isn't it? You know, for
well, this is
as
our
in one of the
connection.
kind of one of the personal, yeah, one of the personal goals from it for both of us is because we are both aware of the fact that we work quite individually a lot of the time, and it's really helpful for us and nice and healthy for us to when you think about connecting with people, just as we're doing with this, it's there's the micro moments. So you can intentionally, you know, nip down to the shop and have a chat with somebody in the shops. And, you know, we're not advising going around accosting people for chats, but, you know, whoever you meet. Um, but when you're thinking about building kind of longer lasting connection, I would say don't enter into that by thinking about the connection or by, you know, with the connection as an outcome. Think about it as something meaningful. So work on something meaningful together, and whether that's in the workplace, obviously you find something that you like, a real shared interest, or a project you're going to collaborate with people on. But it doesn't have to be work. It can be anything, you know, any kind of interest that you have that you share with somebody. So we know that connection comes when you work on something or you're involved in something meaningful with somebody
Mhm.
else. So I would say, you know, if you're thinking, well, I kind of want to make more connections with people, don't kind of fixate on that. Don't fixate on I need to connect with people. Fixate on, okay, right, what's meaningful to me, and what do I share
Mhm.
with other people in terms of those values, and then and go with that. So, and that's why we're doing this podcast, because this is a meaningful project for both of us, and you know, it's
Yeah.
a really good way to connect.
Well, exactly. And I think that is, and I think you're exactly right on that, because I feel like otherwise connecting with people can just become a bit of a tick list. Like, oh, I need to connect with 5 people today. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And actually, my research is looking at what helps people to be resilient and what can hinder
Mm.
resilience. And one of the biggest factors that helps people to build resilience is connection and support. And it is one of the most underplayed factors when it comes to how we
Mm.
train people in how to be resilient or how we talk about well-being. Because if you think about resilience, so resilience is the ability to navigate adversity and grow following the experience. We often think about what we can do in that situation. And of course, from an individual perspective, we should be focusing on that. What can I do to build my coping skills or to be able to navigate uncertainty in a way that's effective for me? That comes down to me as an individual. But the thing about resilience is a lot of it is to do with context. So the situation going on around you, the environment you're surrounded by, the people, the experiences, it's not all to do with you. Some of it is to do with you, but some of it's to do with
Mm.
actually what's going on and some stuff you have no control over. But there's also this big component outside of you, which is also support. So people that have a stronger support system are more likely to be able to navigate challenges in a healthy way, in a way that feels healthy for them.
For them, yeah.
Um, and now we can't always control exactly who we have around us in our support system. Some of that is down to where we are in life, who we know, how that's good. But what we can do going forward is we can be really intentional about it. So we
Yeah.
can think, okay, I feel like I've got a lot of support in my work life, for example, or I've got a lot of support when it comes to people I can talk to about parenting or juggling things or um, looking after relatives that need a lot of help or studying. So you might have certain people you go to for different kinds of support. And you might have great big gaps. You might have, going back to
Mm.
this loneliness topic, it's you can feel very lonely in a room full of people. You
Yeah.
can feel very lonely in a life full of people because
Mhm.
you might feel that people don't necessarily understand what you're going through or um, can't imagine what's going on in your world, or perhaps you're not sharing that, perhaps you're not comfortable to share that. So loneliness isn't about how many people you know and how many people you talk to. That doesn't necessarily make you less lonely. And the same with support. Having lots of people around you doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the support um, that you would like from
Mm.
others. But we can be intentional about it. And I'd say one of the ways to build a really good support network and to build connection with others at the same time
Mm.
is to think about who you offer that to. Because if you're supporting others, whether it be a colleague, and you're talking to them about what's going on, or sharing stories, or empathizing where you can, or perspective taking, which it's one of the things I talk about a lot, like understanding other people's perspectives. You don't have to empathize, you don't have to feel their feelings. Um, if you're doing that for other people, the chances are they'll be doing that for you. And that means over time, and it goes back to what you were talking about in terms of vulnerability and sharing stories and sharing experiences. And it does take time, but
Yeah.
over time, you are building this support system around you, which, if you allow it to, it can help to reduce loneliness. If you are sharing things that
Hmm.
can be quite personal and can
Mm.
make you feel quite vulnerable, then you're probably going to get that back. So
Yeah.
because I think that's one of the scariest things sometimes, if someone is feeling lonely, of thinking, where do I even start?
Where to start?
How
I
do
know.
I get out of this?
Yeah.
It can feel like a pit that you're in, that you just can't find a ladder to like climb out, and
Yeah.
you don't know where to start with that. And my advice is, think about how you are supporting others,
Yeah.
and focus on that, because as time goes on, you are more likely to build a relationship with those people. Not every time, we can't
Mm.
just pick people out of a hat, and it has to be reciprocated. The other person has to be in the right place. I get that, but a lot of it does come from this being honest and sharing
Yeah.
what's going on, which I
Yeah. It
know is
comes down.
scary.
It is scary, and it comes down, doesn't it, to trust. As in,
Mm,
this one of the big things I think that many of us are questioning these days is trust in general, trust with the world, trust with, and trying to build trust. It's harder to build trust when you're not with your colleagues every day. It's harder to build trust in a virtual environment, just literally for this reason, is because what you're doing when you're sharing something slightly vulnerable about yourself is you're putting it out there and basically saying to that person, I trust you with this. And
mhm.
then usually what happens is they reciprocate. I think I've mentioned it before actually on this podcast. I really like this idea. It's called the vulnerability loop. I think it was articulated by a Harvard business professor called Jeff Pulser initially, but it's also in a really good book on culture called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. So he talks a lot about how to get people feeling safe on teams, how to get people kind of well connected on teams, and to use this idea of the vulnerability loop even in your small talk. And so when I looked at it, I realized, oh yeah, I think I have been using this a bit over my career, which is, it's not oversharing. I love the way
Mhm.
Brene Brown says, um, what does she say? So vulnerability minus boundaries is just oversharing.
Yeah,
So it's not that.
100%. Yeah.
And I think this is also a skill, by the way, and it's one I probably don't always get right. Sometimes when I'm feeling really tired, I'm probably down at the school gates, way oversharing about how little sleep I had the night before, or whatever it is. But I think there's a skill in this, right? So, and more today, it's so important because if we think about AI and what we're all up against in terms of AI, being human and being that little bit vulnerable, showing our side of ourselves that makes mistakes, showing the side of ourselves that worries about the future, who isn't always 100% confident about absolutely everything. That's the side that, when you show that, it's amazing how other people are drawn to that because they're thinking to themselves, oh yeah, I identify with that. And
Mhm.
so in the vulnerability loop, even within a brief conversation with somebody, if you just share just a small thing about yourself that, something that you're worried about or something that you're unsure of, that's a signal to the other person that it's safe to say that, something like that. And they
Mhm.
immediately reciprocate with something similar. And then you've got this thing called the vulnerability loop, the outcome of which is connection. So, of course, I'm sure it doesn't always work, but that's what I would always recommend to anybody who struggles a bit with small talk. It's kind of like literally just say something, for example, I'm really struggling with getting my 6-year-old to eat anything but beige food. Do you have any ideas on how to, on how, on what I should cook? So it's literally just kind of sharing something about yourself and then launching into something with curiosity from, and asking them to share as well. I, I don't know. I think you can get a bit prescriptive about this, and I think most people know exactly how to connect with one another. But it's also, I think it's, for me anyway, useful to understand the theory behind it and what
Mm.
works with connecting and how to connect with other people, and why this kind of actually Sadal Neely, who's also a Harvard business professor, calls it mature self-disclosure, which I really love, because again, within the workplace, we don't want loads of radical oversharing. We just want people to kind of show a little snapshot of their human side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, we can bring that into all aspects of our lives, whether it's something that you're doing in the community, whether it's chatting to people that you've met down the down in your local shop. It's something that we can kind of take with us. And it does, as you say, once you do that and once you kind of offer your support to other people as well, it does reciprocate.
And I think start small, because, it can be really
Yeah.
scary, the thought of sharing something. And actually, we actually do some of this on the podcast. And there's times where I share things, but I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should be sharing exactly that. But I'm doing it for a reason. Like, we're doing it for
Yeah.
exactly that reason, in terms of hoping people can connect with that. And there'll be other people that are facing similar challenges or similar experiences to us. And that's why I'm sharing some of this stuff. But it is, and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily comfortable. And it's the same, I think about conversations I have with people that I don't know that well. And sometimes I walk away and think, oh God, did I share too much? Or did I say? And sometimes I can get a little bit anxious about,
Mm,
I definitely get anxious about small talk. I get really anxious about small talk. I
yeah.
don't really know how to do
Me
small
t-
talk, because I'm either talking about stuff or I'm not. I just find this
I
whole,
know.
like, surface level quite hard, because I'm
Yeah.
like,
It is
I don't
hard.
really know. Like, I'm either telling you what's going on, and don't get me wrong, I'm not telling everyone everything, but I'm either kind of giving you a snapshot, or I'm just not engaged. Like, I find, polite small talk, just absolutely terrifies me. And the thought of walking into a room, exactly as you were saying right at the start, when you start a new job, he had to go into this office. He didn't know anyone. Um, Literally, as you were talking about it, I could feel it in my body, like the
Yeah.
anxiety of being like,
Yeah.
oh, I've got to go into that office today, and I don't know anyone, and there's always in jokes, and I don't know who knows who, and I got that when my children starting school as well, and having to figure out, how a lot of that plays together. Um, and I think back, I used to go on training programs back in the day, but, and I was only young. I think, like, straight out of university, and you're sent off on a training program somewhere. I used to have to spend a week somewhere, like, residential. You've got to stay over and talk to these
Yeah.
people for, a whole week. Oh my God, the anxiety. Um,
Mm,
and I do still have a bit of that. But I think, exactly as you say, knowing how this stuff can work. And I think start small, share something small.
yeah.
Someone asks you a question like, how are you? You can be like, oh, it was a tricky night with the kids last night. I thought I'd be over sleep deprivation. My oldest one's almost 7. Like, and genuinely,
Mm,
that is quite a lot of our life sometimes. But I think, sharing things like that, because other people can then be like, oh yeah, we have something similar. Or but it is, and I think finding those boundaries of what you want to share and what you don't want to share is a little
yeah.
bit trial and error.
It
And
is.
sometimes if you do feel a little bit too vulnerable, you've opened up a bit too much, it's not the end of the world. It's really not. And I think some of this is managing and living with some of the discomfort as well
Mm-hmm.
that comes with,
Mm,
we cannot deny that sometimes social situations cause anxiety,
yeah.
and maybe that's partly why so many people are disconnecting as well, to
Yeah. I
avoid
think
that
you've really hit something
anxiety.
there.
It's not
Yeah.
nice walking into an office when you don't know people. Well,
Nope.
for most people, some people thrive in that situation, but lots of people don't. It's not nice walking to a bar when you're waiting for someone and you don't know how long they're going to be. And but
Mm,
by doing these things, we are building our tolerance to it,
yeah.
and the outcome is, yes, some of it is uncomfortable, but the outcome is maybe we're looking after ourselves, because maybe in the
Mm,
long run, maybe not today, maybe it's uncomfortable today, but maybe in the long run, we do become less lonely and we do become more
yeah.
connected.
Yes. It's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? The fact that most things in life that are good for us are uncomfortable, at least at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. And I think this is
100%.
one that we probably don't talk about enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people do find social situations uncomfortable in one way, shape, or form. Like, you've got some people who absolutely love it and they just thrive and that's fine. And but I think most people, in not necessarily in all contexts, but most people can think of a social situation that makes them feel anxious.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a really good reframe to think of it as, okay, well, yeah, I am feeling anxious and yeah, this is uncomfortable, but this discomfort isn't for nothing. It's
Mm-hmm.
helping me deal with this uncertainty and helping my brain to deal with more uncertainty. And also, the outcome of it is potentially that feeling of connection. The immediate outcome is probably that nervous system regulation, but also
Mm-hmm.
the long term outcome is building a bit of social connection. And actually, one of the things as well, the observation I wanted to share is around when I worked a lot in culture change with teams and teams going through change, that actually uncertainty, wherever it may be, whether it's within your workplace or within your team, but also, we saw it during COVID, there's a lot of uncertainty then, that it can give you a reason to connect with people. It gives you a common ground to find connection. So, I saw this thing on LinkedIn this week. LinkedIn have just come up with a report saying 64% of people are overwhelmed with change at work and change and uncertainty at work, which I think is not as surprising. I think pretty much everyone I talk to at the moment is feeling overwhelmed with change at work.
Mm.
People are saying that there's multiple restructures in a year. There is, and also obviously that impending feeling of how is AI going to change our lives? How is the global circumstances affecting us? Everybody's feeling it in some way, shape, or form. But I would always say, well, use that as a way to connect with other people. So pick up the phone or whatever. If you don't feel comfortable on the phone, send a message to somebody who you don't normally connect with in your work, and find out what's going on in their part of the business. Use it as a way to kind of connect with other people and that you wouldn't normally connect with. And usually, uncertainty and change does kind of reshuffle the deck a little bit, and it does give you a reason to connect with other people. So actually, sometimes it's a good thing. And again, I know, not taking away from the fact that it's just uncomfortable in the moment.
Uh-huh.
Uncertainty feels horrendous for most people. I don't, there's not many people who love uncertainty. But actually, again, if you can use it as a way to support others, as you say, I love that idea and that recommendation to kind of think to yourself, oh, well, okay, how can I support others in this time of uncertainty? How can I
Mm.
reach out to somebody else and say, how are you getting on with this? And that obviously that will reciprocate. So, um,
The only thing I'd say though about supporting others is exactly as I say about everything. You can't have too much of something. This is what makes psychology so complicated. And this is why we're not the quick fix people. We're not the people that are like, these are the 5 protocols you need to do to have the best life ever. We're
yeah,
just not those psychologists, because in all honesty, it depends. There's a level.
yeah,
Things that are our strengths can become our dark side if we do too much of it. Annoyingly, that is just how things are when it comes to
yeah,
psychology. And what I would say about supporting others is that is a brilliant place to start. And obviously, that's what I'm recommending. However, don't become the person that only supports other people
yes,
and your needs aren't met. Because there's always a
100%.
dark side. Like, that is
Mm,
the dark side if you become too
yeah,
supportive. Which sounds amazing, but we just have to make sure we're looking after ourselves as well. And that's why
yeah,
we have these conversations, because we talk about the nuances of this stuff. It's not a checklist. Anyone that gives you a checklist that says these 10 things get you through change, these 10 things are the only things you need to do to be resilient, um, it's not true. And they're
no,
fooling you, because it all depends on you, the circumstances, how much you're doing something. And I know that can make things a little bit complicated, but equally, I think the more we have these conversations and the more we get to know ourselves and build our self-awareness about ourselves, the easier it becomes to spot these things and to create a life that works for us. Um, And one of the tips I would give actually around this idea, so obviously offer support for sure. But have you seen loads of stuff in the press recently about pebbling? This idea of pebbling and
Oh
what
yeah, I love
pebbling
this.
means.
Yes.
And I've been
Explain
using
that
it quite a
again.
lot and I love it. So for anyone that hasn't come across it, pebbling comes from the world of penguins. So
Oh
apparently,
yeah.
oh, it's so cute. So penguins, to show they care about each other, will offer little pebbles to each other, and it's like a sign of
Cute.
affection and showing the other penguin or penguins that they care, and it's a connection, and they do that for each
Mm,
other. And we've been looking a lot in how humans can do this. So how can we take that into the human world?
mm,
And actually, I think it can work really well in this context of building connection and reducing loneliness, because it could be things like sending someone memes on WhatsApp. So you might have
yeah.
a friend that you send little pictures to, or funny reels about, whatever interests you both. And it goes back to the idea of find something that's meaningful for you and that person to connect
Yeah.
about. But it could be sending a postcard, it could be a quick phone call, it could be, but they're small gestures that are meaningful in the moment, probably quite quick to do, and
Mm,
they continually build little tiny bits of connection with you and another
yeah.
person or a group of people. And I think if we can find ways to build that more pebbling into our lives, then maybe we will be
Yeah.
less lonely and feel more connected and build that sense of belonging with others.
And I love that idea as well because it doesn't necessarily rely on face-to-face connection.
Mm,
Because, although we started talking about the fact that that is really important and we shouldn't lose it, the reality is our lives are way more virtual now. Our lives are pretty much conducted a lot of the time in work virtually, and also we're more connected to people across the world now, which is really nice as well. So we're literally, like you said, you and I don't get to see each other, but we are quite connected. And
mm,
I think that's nice. So this, you can do this idea of pebbling. You can send somebody something in the post or on a meme or whatever. It doesn't. It says that you can still experience that connection with someone even if it is from afar. And I think that's an important one for people who are maybe working on virtual teams to think through as well. How are you just having those little moments of connection with one another apart from being on your Zoom calls? That just does mean that you're kind of sharing a little bit of your human side with one another. It actually
mm.
reminds me of there's this thing again in the Daniel Coyle book called belonging cues. He talks about belonging cues, and they're just, within a group, there are all these little tiny little cues that you have. It goes back to that thing of going into that office and on the first day and seeing all the little tiny little cues that the team share with one another that you don't know yet, and whether it's a team biscuit tin, and that's an important thing because that team shares that biscuit tin, but that other team
Yeah.
doesn't have access to that biscuit tin. You have to learn
Oh,
all of these things, all the
yeah.
little intonations that teams make, the little tiny little kind of phrases that they use when they're chatting to one another, the fist bumps, how polite they are to one another. All of these things that you have to use, and I think. If you are already in a team, one way of kind of paying it forward, I think that doesn't probably take huge amounts from you, because I think your point is really valid about not always being the one to support others. But one way you can do it is just look around your team and look around the group that you're in, whether it's in the workplace or another social environment, and make sure that you are including other people in those belonging cues. Make sure that everybody knows that they feel that they
Mm,
belong by using these little cues. It's a really nice way of doing it, and pebbling is, I love that idea. I think pebbling is a great way of sharing those little cues amongst people. Just a little sign, we're connected. You belong here. I just think it's lovely. So, yeah,
I
actually,
love it.
the more we talk about this, the more I feel positive about it.
Yeah, I feel like we can undo this. I feel like we can help the world be less lonely. I think having open and honest conversations helps. And I know,
Mm,
exactly as we said earlier, that can feel vulnerable. It feels vulnerable for us doing it. Uh,
yeah.
but it's important because there are other people experiencing similar things. And, the more that we can talk about what's going
Mm,
on in our lives, I think the better. Okay, so let's think about. So let's wrap up these tips then. So if we can kind of pull it all together. So
yeah.
Pebbling. I think we've got that one. So
We've
little
got pebbling.
tiny gestures of connection. Okay,
I'm going to go ahead and
amazing.
do a pebble someone later. I think
I hope
I
it's me.
think it'll be you. I'll definitely send you some sort of a meme. Don't worry. Um, I think being intentional, like using, just being deliberate about prioritizing. I don't know whether it's prioritizing a collaboration at work or prioritizing connecting with someone. And again, I know that sounds really obvious, but I find myself having to do that because I
Mhm.
naturally, as you were describing earlier, I naturally would probably opt for the go home and work from my sofa option where I possibly can, but try and make sure that you're getting yourself out there a bit. Um, what else? Focusing on something meaningful.
Meaningful. Yep.
Yes.
Meaning. I think
Slap,
that's
snap.
key here because
Yeah.
snap. I think the meaning bit is key because, if we go back to connection versus loneliness, you can connect with a lot of people and feel lonely. But I think if
Yeah.
you are talking about or connecting over something that's meaningful, that matters to you and matters to the other person, that's going to make you feel less lonely, not just like you're surrounded by people or you've got lots of people that you're talking to. So I think that
Mm.
meaning part and finding potentially even different people to connect to different parts of meaning in your life
Yeah.
is really key as well.
Really key. And then I think probably the vulnerability loop. Think about that.
Mm.
How the mature self disclosure, how you're using that to build connection. Practice it a bit, maybe. I know I do. Probably in a way that I get wrong all the time. But if nothing else, I give myself a laugh and probably other people a laugh too because I've said a big clanger and
Oh, that's my life too. That's
yeah.
my life. But you know what? How often do you connect to people over that as well? Because people that find that amusing, I'm like, well, we're obviously the same kind of people. I think we're going
Ex-
to get on.
Such a good point. It's a great way of testing how other people and whether they're on your wavelength. It's a really
Yeah.
that's such a good point. I like that. Let's
I mean,
end there.
sometimes it does scare people. So, like, be warned. Sometimes I say something, I can
Yeah.
just see, like, someone's face glaze over. Oh, I'm
Uh,
like, oh, why have I said that? I don't know what. I don't even know
uh,
where that came from half the time. But then sometimes, and I think that's okay. We are different people.
yeah.
We are going to express things in different ways, and that's okay. It's okay to, some people we connect with on a deeper level than others. That's life, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
and I think
definitely.
showing a bit of ourselves and potentially being a bit of a twit sometimes, in my case, probably does help with that, like finding your people a little bit as well.
I can see why you and I connected
You
over a
see
lecture
as
hall.
well. Oh, I can definitely
Um,
see. I think there might be some espresso martinis as well. It might have helped with that.
oh,
Maybe a few glasses of
undoubtedly.
wine as well.
Yeah. Um, so is there anything else or have we covered
I think that's
the main point?
I feel like that's a good amount to think about when it comes to, if
Yeah.
we think about ourselves, if we're thinking about how we help family members or friends or team members, like things to think about. Um, and it's getting me thinking as well. And I think what I'm going to take away from this is not looking at it like, oh, I'm pushing myself to do something social when I'm not really in the mood for it. And I'm only talking about when it's people I actually want to see. I
Mm.
can't bear social events where I don't want to be there. But people I actually do genuinely want to see, but it takes a lot of effort to get myself there.
Mm.
I'm actually going to look at it like a well-being practice, like something
Yeah,
I'm doing
me too.
to
Yeah.
look after myself and
Yeah.
to live potentially, but hopefully, a long, happy, healthy life.
Yeah.
Like putting that effort in. Well, exactly. We're going back to those stats right at the start that you shared in terms
Mm.
of it can be as dangerous as smoking. Like
Yeah.
this is important stuff. So that's how I'm going to look
Yeah.
at it. I'm going to look at it like a health habit.
So what you're saying is you and I should book in a Christmas party to have some more espresso
Hmm.
martinis. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
exactly what I'm saying. And actually, we have been talking about getting together somewhere warm over winter,
Yes.
haven't we? So
We have. I think this is an absolute the
this is
business
a
case for
sign.
it. Yeah.
This is the sign. Is that why you chose this topic this week?
It is. Yeah. 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 It was to remind you. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, so I think we've covered this topic, but there's probably loads more that we could talk about on it. So if
Mhm.
anybody has questions about it or wants us to delve into anything that we talked about in more detail, the email address is hello@psychologyinthewild.com. Am I
We
right?
think. We're never quite sure. No, it is. There's just been some confusion around our email address. And
Yeah.
if this is something that you enjoyed listening to, please feel free to share with other people that might enjoy it.
Yes.
And also rate or like. We're not entirely sure, but whatever
one of
platform
those
you're on,
things.
do one of those things. If there's an option to do something nice and, say you enjoyed it or show that you enjoyed the podcast, please feel free to do that.
And until next week, stay safe in the wild.
Indeed. So safe.